Now I would like to give the floor to the first speaker on my list. That is, as it was agreed at the end of the first of the morning session, the distinguished representative of Venezuela. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Co-Chairman. I'd like to thank the distinguished speakers who have joined us this morning, and thank you, one and all. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to begin by pointing out that today's world is governed according to four principles, which are four ecological principles: the principle of interdependence, interrelationship, complementarity, and solidarity. Well, we have no problem with interdependence and interrelationships, but complementarity, accepting complementarity means accepting that we have equal relations. But the world in which we live is a world which is completely unequal, and hence the complementarity tends to be imposed by force. And in that context, in that very difficult context, it's difficult for the other principle that's left, solidarity, to be fulfilled, and that is related to the topic that we're dealing with. And I would like to refer once again to the relationship between the countryside and the cities, an important theme that we have repeated. The relationship between countryside and cities have to do with the time when civilizations stop depending on the earth. They stop depending on nature, and we begin to see the idea that we could dominate nature, we could control nature. And with that idea that we could dominate nature, the ecosystems start to be destroyed. And in this way, cities are built, the modern cities are built on the basis of this idea that nature is a source of economic growth and can be exploited as such. So it's not a matter of peaceful coexistence, true coexistence between nature and human beings. It's a relationship of exploitation. So in this context, it is exploitation, and hence modern cities, contemporary cities, are built on the basis of breaking the balance of the ecosystem, and it leads to the situation that we have today. And hence, development is related to this fact, to the breaking this relationship, breaking this balance of complementarity and solidarity with nature. And this is our idea of modernity. And so the countryside is left behind, and there is a lack of progress. And so when we say today that development equals urbanization, in one way or another, we are reproducing that idea that the countryside is backwards and the cities are civilization. Now, it turns out that this development that we have imposed, and hence Rio 92 and Rio plus 20, they impose that level of development. And we are working now on what we call sustainable development. So development and sustainable development are not two similar things. They are profoundly different, and we can't overlook that. And that's what I pointed out. That's what I mentioned yesterday. And so that's why yesterday things were said, such as cities are self-sustainable, and they mentioned Rome as an example. And we all know, and this is duly documented, that Rome was built by collecting taxes on those regions which Rome dominated. That example is not true. Nor is it true that the automobile, the private automobile, is a symbol of freedom. It's a symbol of freedom for those who can afford to buy it. And this violates the other liberal principle that one's rights begins where the other person's ends. So having a car and polluting the environment is in conflict with collective rights, and so this is unsustainable. And so the problem of the relationship between the countryside and the cities was resolved this morning in a statement that pointed out that without sustainable agriculture, there is no sustainable city. And this means that the relationship between countryside and cities is very complex, and it cannot be reduced to the dominance of one over the other, because even though the population trend is such that population grows in cities, as we know, this brings about very serious problems. And so one way of tackling those problems is understanding that today we have a very diverse population with a very complicated geography. There is a population which is all of humankind, and there's no other solution but for all of humankind to live together, to enjoy all rights, whether it be in the city or the country, especially since day after day those borders are more porous. And so this brings us to the problem of the role of the private market and private sector. There's no discussion today about the role of the market or the role of the private sector. But the problem we're discussing today is who establishes the rules of the game. If the rules of the game are established by the state, or are they established by the private sector? That's where the debate lies, not the importance of one over the other. In either of those two visions, if we believe that the state establishes the rules or the private sector establishes the rules, in both cases, afterwards, when it comes to the law of the market, we have to distinguish between the local market, which is still important for today's world, and at the other extreme, we have future markets. There is a big difference between the roles of both, and I don't have time to explain it right now. But the problem of our relationship with nature, which is present today, and that is why today we believe that we are independent of nature, but perhaps we're more dependent on nature than at any other time in our history. And to be able to restore a path of sustainable development, because we do depend on nature, and what happens in nature will happen to humankind. I'll move to another point with which I'm going to conclude. The problem of the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, I believe that there's nothing wrong with establishing many goals and objectives, because we're going to work better if we have that to realize and to achieve some goals. But the problem, as we see it, is that there's a framework for those goals, and that framework has a few very important ingredients. On the one hand, poverty eradication. That is a fundamental framework. But poverty eradication, it's not simply poverty that affects human beings, but poverty affecting the land, because it's very clear today that there's a clear interrelationship between poverty of the earth and poverty of people. And there's also the fact that people acquire power, become empowered to control their lives. And in that framework, to resolve the SDGs, it's not a matter of establishing a list of goals. These goals are accompanied by two principles: the common but shared responsibility, as well as the fulfillment of the pending goals, financial transfer, technology transfer, and capacity building. And so within that framework, we believe that that is how we can speak about sustainable development goals and objectives. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Venezuela.